Giovanni, thanks for coming on the show. Great to have you.
Thanks for having me. Looking forward to it.
Do you want to just start by just telling us a little bit about the background of the business and how you got started?
Yeah, definitely. Sourci was, I never thought I'd end up doing this. I can say that honestly. Um, I mean, before Sourci, I had another company, a printing company. It was a service-based business. And in some ways, it kind of operates the same. And I'm guessing, I think I took a lot of lessons from that business and applied it to Sourci. But pretty much, we were working as a broker for marketing managers to source their printing products both locally and overseas. And that's kind of how I got my first introduction to China and manufacturing overseas. And I really thought there was a pain point there of, you know, I struggled myself. And if you think about printing products, they're very low risk. You're taking a water bottle and you're putting a logo on it. And, the 2 or 3 years that we did this, every few months we'd have an issue with the supplier where the instructions weren't followed or the pricing didn't come out correct or the product was faulty. And it led me to think, what would it look like if you could get the benefit of working with overseas suppliers, but you had someone locally that you could deal with, someone locally that you could trust. And and that's what we kind of mapped out as the first version of the business. And that's what led us into kind of starting the journey of Sourcey. And I think, you know, like I said, my background isn't in supply chain procurement. And neither was my business partner who I eventually brought into the business as well. So really the background in the business was first 2 years, just understanding what it really meant to deal with overseas suppliers in the correct way, how to build a team overseas, how to understand the different types of importing, manufacturing, product development, the right sampling process, right quality assurance and quality control process. So it was really kind of like almost going back to school in some ways,
Yeah.
which I didn't really want to do, but it was just kind of once we started, we didn't know how to stop.
Yeah. And you've got to learn all those parts as you go along. You discover the next part that you didn't know, and then the next part, and you just got to keep on going, right?
Exactly right. And I think for me, that's the way I like to learn. I was never an academic student by any means. I love learning through experiences, and I think that can be great at times. It can also be quite costly if you're failing on the job. Sometimes it can result in mistakes that end up really affecting the business. But all in all, Ali and I, my business partner, we just had this hunger to want to understand and wanted to learn. And I can honestly say, even now, I'd like to think I'm quite astute when it comes to product development, manufacturing. I think I understand probably more than most, but there is just so much to learn in this industry. If you think about how long supply chain's been around for, it's one of the first ever pioneered industries of trade, and so there's still so much that I'm yet to learn about what I do.
And I mean, the business only started, is it how many years ago? Only a few years ago, really, right?
We just turned 5 about a month ago. So, it's starting to mature. If it was a kid, it'd be about, yay tall. But it's getting there. So just over 5 years now.
And in terms of the sort of the growth, from what I've read and what I know, it's been pretty rapid.
Yeah,
How have you managed that process?
it's a good question. Poorly, I would say, if I look back on it. I think that's a really big lesson that I learned was, we scaled way too quick. I'm
Right.
really fortunate for everything that happened in terms of COVID was a bit of a blessing in our business because it allowed us to acquire new clients and open up deals that we probably wouldn't have access to. But a lot of people were stuck and they didn't know how to find new overseas suppliers, and we're in a really good position. But going from, just understanding how sourcing supply chain works at that time, I was still quite novice. This is maybe 2 years in,
Yeah.
to then going from 5 to 6 staff to 30, 40 staff in about 8 months time frame, especially without investors or a board to give you some governance and some guidance.
Yeah.
It's kind of a bit of chaos. And right now I can say everything's smooth sailings. I actually sent my business partner a message today saying this is the best I've felt in the business in over a year.
Probably shouldn't have sent that message.
Now you know what happens next.
Yeah, you've just set yourself up.
That's it. I'm on a wooden desk, so touch wood. But but yeah, it was chaos to be honest, and it took a really long time for me, as a leader, because my role within the business is CEO, to really understand even what my role truly was, at scale. It's really different being the leader of a company of 5 or 6 people because it's so interconnected. You know what everyone's up to. It's very transparent. But once you get to those bigger numbers, you're totally reliant on accountability and visibility of your leadership team, You're relying on processes to actually work. And a lot of this stuff we just didn't build fast enough around us. And we really did encounter some problems at when we did grow and scale.
Yeah. And from a scaling perspective, like you said, you haven't taken out any outside investment to date. Is that right?
Right. Just me and my business partner.
And so that's just organic growth.
Yep, exactly right. We had some really significant size deals come through during COVID that allowed us to kind of cash flow the business in a
Yeah.
really significant way.
Talking tens of millions of dollars, right? In terms
Correct.
of turnover.
I
And that's
think, within an 8-month period, we did about $30 to $40 million in revenue, which is insane. We're
Yeah.
doing less than a tenth of that prior to it as well. So some big
Yeah.
numbers flying around and
rapid learning curve.
yeah, it really was. The like what we were saying before, the mistakes you make at those levels as well, they hurt a lot more than when you're at a $5 million revenue business.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And as you've gone through that process and you've learned, what's the biggest strength that you've seen that you have as you've gone through, especially from the smaller starting point
Yep.
to having 40 people plus or whatever it might be?
Yeah, I definitely think the strengths have changed. I think, at the start, I'm very much a risk taker, and that has a time and a place. At the start of business, you can afford to take risks, and everyone's different, right? I didn't have children. I didn't have collateral of a house. If things went belly up, I would be able to start again hopefully quite easily without too much stress around me. So I was happy to take some really big risks on some big deals and it all paid off, which I'm quite lucky. But, as a business matures, you can't really have that mindset because there's a lot more to lose and you need to be more risk adverse. So it started off being quite, my skill set or my strength was that risk taker. But eventually what I think I learned and my strongest skill set was my empathy and the relationships I can build with the team and the culture that comes from that as well. I think that anyone who comes in here loves working here. And it's because of the energy in the office and it's because of the relationships that I have with the team members. And it's everyone's so united on getting the right outcomes and working together that they want to step up and improve and do well. And I think that's kind of what's growing the business at the moment. It's not me and they're pushing everyone every day, but everyone wanting to succeed because they love being a part of this team. And that comes really from the relationships that we all have.
Yeah. Okay. And what about in terms of your co-founder? Do you guys offset each other's strengths and weaknesses, or there's overlap? How do you guys work together?
We're complete opposites, which is good. We joke about it, but we're really lucky. I mean, there's a lot of co-founders out there and you hear some shocking stories, and I don't think him and I have ever had an argument or a fight in 5 years. And there's been some really hard times, but his skill sets are very much the opposite of mine. He's a hunter. He's a true hunter. He loves finding deals. He loves putting deals together. And I think, it naturally happened. But one of the hardest times I had within the business was, we were both co-founders for some period of time. And you know what it's like. You don't need two chiefs in one village.
Yep.
It gets confusing for everyone in there. And I think one of the hardest discussions him and I ever had was me saying, I think I need to be CEO and you need to go off and his role pretty much at the moment is he goes and finds new business opportunities. He sets up some of our new subsidiaries or our new sister companies that work alongside Sourci as well, because he's just said he can't be in the day-to-day having meetings with team members. It's just he gets too itchy. He can't sit still long. Be out there knocking down doors, finding opportunities and bringing back deals and doing that side. So yeah, we do complement each other a lot.
And so having that discussion, how long ago was that you guys realized?
Probably over a year and a bit ago.
Right. And having had that discussion, did it click into place fairly quickly after you sort of both realized that, or was it?
Best thing we ever did. It was so instantaneous because I think that we've openly spoken about this, but I think for him, he almost felt a little bit lost within the business, if that makes sense, because people had started coming to me and I'd started fulfilling more of that role of a CEO. And for him, it's like, you want to know that you still have a place in this thing that you've built, right? I think that's the ego side talking, and I have it as well. So obviously he wanted to make sure that, Sourci was still his company and he was still a big part of it, but it just meant that he had to be comfortable kind of going off and doing what his strengths are, even though that didn't mean maybe interacting with the team as much or being the face of the company as much as what he had used to be as well.
Yeah. But once you do make that change, presumably you've got the benefits of that come out in the last 12 months. And having that, defining those roles is actually critical, right?
It really is.
It's happened naturally and then you've had to address it because it started to evolve. But having defined roles, even at the very top of any company, just it matters so much.
You don't realize how much people within the organization need to understand how things work, right? A
Mm.
lot of people love structure. I don't, right? I'm a bit more of a free spirit. I can go with whatever happens, but a lot of people want to know, who do I report to? Who do I go when this happens? What does that person do? What does that person do? How do they communicate together? Because it makes up a part of their job and it makes them feel safe within their work as well. So, we were very loose in the past where this, Ali might take on some of this responsibility and I might take on some of this. It can get so confusing for one employee where they're trying to think, well, who do I go to now? And so once we
Yeah.
clear all that up, everything just started to click a lot better and flow a lot better within the business.
Yeah. Okay. And what about in terms of weaknesses that you've got as you've gone through? What have you had to address?
It, it ties to the conversation of the co-CEO. And it's interesting because it's like, I like to think that I can reflect every now and again. And I've got a really great mentor who's unintentionally pointed out, or maybe not, maybe intentionally pointed out where my weaknesses sit as a part of his way of coaching me. And for a very long time, and even now to a small degree, I can be conflict avoidant. I'll avoid having hard conversations at times, and I'll try to find another solution and having to deal with something then and there.
Yeah.
And a really good point, like example of that is that us splitting that role. I've been thinking about it for 3 months, and I've had 100 conversations with friends and family because I was so concerned about how it hurt his feelings or what it could mean to the business or how it could be interpreted. And you realize that once you realize that's a muscle, right? Like any muscle in your body, the more you train it, the better you are. Once I figured that out, I've just thrown myself into every time there's a hard situation, a hard conversation that needs to be had, a problem that needs to be dealt with. It's instantaneous now for me to throw myself into it because that's the only way I'm going to grow and turn into the leader that I need to be as well.
And that's usually the best way, right? I mean, it might not feel that way at the time necessarily, but like you say, if it's something that you can learn to do and be comfortable with, it addresses, you get 3 months, you knew about that and we're discussing it. But often on the flip side of that, the other person who you need to have that conversation with is probably feeling something
Yep.
similar. And the
Yep.
sooner you can just sort of almost clumsily have that conversation if need, because it comes from the right place, right? With intent, that's the genuine intent to improve or for the betterment of the company. It works itself out.
100%. Like you're completely right. Most of the time when you have that conversation, the other person's already expecting it, right? It's
Yeah.
just, you got to find a little bit of courage within yourself to have it. So I think, that was definitely my weakness, even recently, but I've just had to really flex that muscle to become the person I want to be.
Yeah, right. That's really interesting. And not everyone can do those sorts of things, right? Because it is difficult to face that. But once you do it a few times, I think it just gets exponentially easier
Yeah. I
to
agree.
to do it. And then from I guess to a certain point with no matter what it is, whether it's, any sort of conflict or it just doesn't matter what it is, whatever you're concerned about or struggle with, do it enough times and it starts to become easy. But if you don't get over that hump, you never get there.
I think also, if you look at the difference potentially between like a founder and a CEO, a founder can be more emotional and they're more in love
Mm.
with the starting of the business and the
Their
concept,
baby.
their baby, right? But then, if I can't have those hard discussions and if I can't run the business the way it needs to be, then I need to step aside and let someone else come in and be the CEO because CEOs need to be the ones that aren't scared to have hard conversations and make those decisions. And once I realized I wasn't living to those values, it was either I do it and I become an expert at it or I become comfortable in it, or I have to find someone else to come in and run the business because I'll ruin it. I'll hold it back myself.
Yeah. Yeah. And in terms of things like hard conversations that, you talked briefly before about COVID and that sort of stuff. How did that go in terms of your business, in terms of business itself, but also in terms of dealing with staff as you're obviously rapidly growing, but presumably there's some problems in that everyone faced throughout COVID. How did you guys go with that sort of stuff?
Okay. Wasn't that bad, to be honest. I mean, there was a few moments where when COVID first happened, we were working out of my lounge room. We had about 7 or 8 people working from there, back then. And we'd just taken on our first lease in South Yarra, and we were on Yarra Street, and it looks over South Yarra Station, which is one of the busiest stations in Melbourne. And we did everything. We were painting the walls, we were getting secondhand furniture, we were making our own space. And the weekend that we moved in, Dan Andrews announced the lockdown, and South Yarra Station went from having, 5,000 people commute every morning to just dead. And we looked at each other and said, shit, what now? And we're quite lucky that we ran a lot of Google ads for very generic search terms. So like, let's say China manufacturing. And all of a sudden the inquiries would start to change, and it picked up, and it started being inquiries for like, hand sanitizer or masks. And we were in a really fortunate position where we had the team in China as well as resources here, where a lot of companies just, they couldn't get over there. So they couldn't find their new suppliers. They didn't know how to work with new suppliers. It was all a bit risky. So for us, overnight we started getting some really big inquiries, and we were able to service some of them. And, we were so busy that we worked our asses off during COVID. So, how a lot of businesses probably scaled down, or people were put on, a few days a week. Everyone was running 100 miles an hour trying to get through everything that we had. And then you had the boom of e-commerce at the same time. So, we had all this uptake from PPE equipment and new inquiries, and then also these waves of new online businesses that were starting. So we just shut up. And, I think one of the harder points, or where things went right, but then when things went wrong, was, like I said, we went from 6 staff to maybe 30 staff in Melbourne in maybe a 6 to 8 month period. And one of the things I look back and I really regret at that time was I put on a lot of middle management. And that can be great sometimes because they're there to help and they're there to solve your problems, and usually you hire experts at what they do. And the other really good point at that time was, because there was so many redundancies taking place, as an employer, the candidates were incredible. There was a lot of really highly talented people that have just been made redundant that we were able to snap up quite quickly. But the problem was I had no experience in managing a team of that size, and I let middle management tell me everything was going great when really customers were suffering, our team was overworked, and I had really high staff turnover. We had really unhappy customers at some point. And it took me to kind of get my hands dirty and create that accountability and visibility in the business to pretty much turn over that middle management team. And, for the last year and a half, I've pretty much been running the account management team, and I've been helping with sales. And I've just put someone in to scale me back now, because I had to kind of get in there and really understand what needed to be done.
Yeah. Okay. So you really had to understand how it works at the coalface, or in that middle spot, before you could then have other people come in, and so what to look for, as opposed to just being told.
Exactly right. And
Yeah. Okay.
how to build that accountability and that visibility, that even now, if I step back, I know exactly what I need to do to actually check in on our team, and how to check in on our customers to ensure that what I'm being told is the experience that they're
Yeah.
having. The most important part of our business.
Yeah. It's really interesting, because you've gone into a business that wasn't necessarily your domain experience or expertise before, where most people would say, go into something that you know really well. And
Yeah.
you kind of done the opposite, right? But it's really, you understood that, you've gone and thrown yourself into it and learned what you had to learn to get on top of things. But that's a really interesting approach.
I can't remember who I was listening to. It was someone quite famous, some tech billionaire, and he just said, "Never start a business unless you have a founder who has the skill sets within that business." And this was halfway through the journey, and
Yeah.
things are starting to work a little bit. I go, "Shit, is it too late?" And I just thought, "Oh,
Yeah.
yeah,
But that's the common thing. But it doesn't necessarily mean, what you're demonstrating is that that's not necessarily the case. And you've got to have that enthusiasm for learning. And sometimes that naivety when you very first start is a blessing in disguise, because you might not have done it if you had known more. But once you start, you just keep on going, right?
100%." I think that's the truth. Is the probably the optimism and the, like, how big I could see the opportunity or the market. And even now, like, I still see that there is such a big market that we can service, and it's unlimited, right? Any product that we touch, we can be involved in. That means if it's retail, consumer, if it's to B2B, if it's uniforms, any product that comes in the country, we can have some sort of involvement if we want to. So
Yeah.
it's unlimited potential. But, that ambition and that excitement is kind of what it got us through to where we are today. Because there was times where, I thought of quitting and packing it up and trying something else, because it felt like it was just a constant uphill battle. And it still is in some ways, but I think, you become a bit more resilient, and you're a bit more, I guess, understanding of how things work.
Yeah. And in terms of the business, I mean, you guys, if someone wants you guys basically offer the infrastructure to outsource people's supply chain. Is that effectively
Correct.
what you guys will do for people?
So for a customer, so we've probably got a few different, recently we've got a few different revenue streams and offerings. So
Yeah.
it started off just exactly that. So someone would come to us and they'd say they want to develop, furniture. We would help
Yep.
them find factories, develop it, manufacture it, bring it in. Where it's kind of changed over time is we've moved away from working with smaller companies and startups just because of the amount of work that's involved in the process. We can't monetize them properly. We have additional services now, like we have a course that will teach someone to do it themselves, as well as some free resources. But really now what we've been able to do is specialize in a few key categories. So for instance, apparel, beauty, homewares, accessories, packaging, and health and wellness are our key categories. And for instance, within apparel, if someone comes to us now, we're really geared up to service those larger businesses or medium-sized businesses. So we have in-house designers, garment technicians. Our head of productions worked for French Connection and studied fashion in Paris. We've got really great relationships with suppliers and factories overseas. So you're really leveraging a ton of experience and wealth and knowledge from within Sourci. And then what we've kind of diversified into the last 6 months was we've started now working on tenders. So we've been submitting and winning some government tenders and some large tenders as well. Again, they kind of rotate around the key categories that we work in, so apparel, uniforms, that space. And then on the other side, we've now gone directly into major retailers. So if you think about the business, we've worked with over 1,500 clients in the last 5 years. And we've developed products in almost any product you can imagine. And in that time, we've been able to build relationships with really great factories who don't just offer the product that our clients wanted us to develop, but a range of products. So once we've now identified who these great suppliers are, we've gotten them to kind of send us what their capabilities are. And then we're taking those and packaging them up and trying to get them into major retailers like Coles, Big W, Baby Bunting. And that's where the business is headed, is trying to split it up. So it's not just the agency and the clients, but we've got tenders and retailers and some other services as well.
Is that from a diversification perspective of revenue streams, or is it a growth opportunity, or a bit of both, probably?
A bit of both. So one is leveraging the resources that we have in here.
Yep.
With all of the amazing suppliers and products that we've developed, we're just really taking that and then applying for a tender and using those resources. The retailers. The other is the Australian markets. We're just starting to tap into it, I think, in the right way, but it's not huge in some ways, right? So the ideal client that we have is someone who spends $1 million on us, who's a big e-commerce brand. There really is a handful of those businesses, not a handful, but not as many as you'd like. And if they don't have any pain points or troubles, we can't really help them as well. We're not like an advertising company where we can service every single e-commerce company. We're a supply chain company with expertise in certain categories. And then if they don't have those internal resources, can we really deliver a lot of value for them as well?
Yeah. In terms of supply chains, I'm really interested in your views and experience in terms of, since Russia invaded Ukraine and you've had the whole world sort of turn on its head a little bit, and with that comes a lot of things like reshoring and the change in the way supply chains look like they may evolve.
Mm-hmm.
Have you noticed a change? Have you, and how do you see that all playing out?
No, not really, to be honest. I mean, nothing really. So the biggest difference is people. So our clients are Australian, right? I'd say 95% of our business. If we had more American customers or US customers, I think it would be a different conversation, because right now we get a lot of inquiries from Australian businesses who want to diversify outside of China. And that's a fancy way of saying, I want to have a backup plan in case anything goes wrong, right?
So you are seeing that conversation happen.
We are seeing a little bit of that, right? We definitely are. But once people understand, or brands understand, that it's going to cost more, that the MOQs are higher, that it costs more to ship, that the lead time is going to be longer, that there's less suppliers to pick from, and the certification or quality might not be the same, they continue to work with China. So we've explored it several times for some big brands, and we've kind of put together, I guess, research summaries and presented what it would look like to diversify the supply chain, more like consulting services. But no one really takes it up because
of cost.
It costs. Exactly right. Do you want to pay 20% more, 30% more for your product? No, not really. Especially with raw material prices going up, and six has come down now, but at one point it was quite a lot higher as well. So there's that nice to know that it's there, but until it's a really big problem, I don't think and I can't see major brands moving over there.
Yeah, okay. So they're really still cost driven, especially with the cost of everything going up anyway.
Yep.
People are still, businesses are more cost conscious.
And also those suppliers in countries like India, Vietnam, Sri Lanka, a lot of the US based companies have moved their supply chain there. So if you think about the size of the US clients that they will deal with versus Australian clients as well, it does create a very high barrier to entry because the MOQs will sit, minimum order quantities will sit so far higher than what they would in China suppliers as well. So it's just not an easy transition for a lot of brands and businesses.
Okay. Yeah, okay, that's really interesting. It's I would have thought there would be more movement that way rather than just inquiry. But that's really interesting to see on the ground. What you're saying is that.
For the clients that we service, maybe for really large established brands, 100 million plus, maybe that they are kind of diversifying further. But the brands that we work with, it's still just about finding the right product at the right price with the right certifications and the right.
Which does make sense, because as much as you might want to have that backup plan, like you say, if it's going to cost an extra 30%, that's very hard to deal with unless everyone in the country is doing the same thing, because suddenly just going to be uncompetitive, right?
Exactly. And if you're dealing with the founder of a business, and even if it's a small company, that's 30% that goes out of their pocket.
Yeah, it's huge. Yeah. In terms of the business as you started, what was the best decision you made?
I think bringing on Ali as a co-founder, this is kind of a two-part one. So, I was actually unsure if him and I would work together well. We went to high school together. We didn't really talk outside of it. We linked up a little bit. I'd already kind of started Sourci. It was nothing at the time, but I had the name. I at least had a website. That's pretty much as far as we got. But I was unsure if I'd want him as a business partner. And honestly, because we were so different in the way that we thought and the way that we interacted, but hands down, the best decision I've ever made was to bring him as a co-founder and for him to be my 50-50 partner in the business as well. And then the second part to that was splitting our roles, like what we talked about before. So not only bringing him in, because that really helped he was just amazing to work with during that phase, but then being able to have someone, this business takes my time up day to day, right? And if I was in here and we had all these opportunities that I was missing, there'd be so much that would go past me that, I'd look back and have regret. And I'm lucky that his focus is that, because some of the deals, some of the new companies that we've started in the last year and a half, they're going to be just as big as Sourci, and he's not out there finding those opportunities. It means that we're kind of limited. And don't get me wrong, I'm really grateful for what we have, but it's, there's plenty more out there to be done.
Yeah. In terms of best advice, what was the best advice you've been given over the journey so far?
Best advice. Actually, this is probably more from my mentor. Accountability is a word that I like to use a lot now. And it was one that I didn't use before. And everything that happens in the business and anything good and anything bad is your responsibility, right? If anyone ever makes a mistake, doesn't matter who it is and what the mistake is, it all still sits with you as the business owner. I think once you change your mind frame from that person made a mistake to I've allowed that mistake to happen within the business because of the way I've set up processes or whatever, or the values that I've set or the way that we communicate, then you start to think about how to solve those problems differently. And I think creating that accountability and understanding that everything good that happens in the business is definitely you're attributed to as well, but definitely all the mistakes, anything that goes wrong is just as much your fault, or if not all your fault, and not the person who's involved in that decision as well.
And all of those things, I guess, lead to better systems or different learnings and all those sorts of things. So that it all helps, right, to improve.
And I think for the culture of the company, having a leader who can put their hand up and say, this is my fault too, takes away the pressure from people feeling like they can't make mistakes, because that is detrimental to a culture of a business. You will eventually have people who either make mistakes and spend too much time trying to cover them up and make them worse, or you'll never be able to solve your problems because they never come to the surface. And I think that was one of the strongest parts of that advice got turned into, how do we make it that when people are making mistakes, they feel comfortable to raise their hand? I take the accountability with them and we work on proper solutions of fixing these problems.
Yeah, okay. No, that makes sense. Okay, 4 final ones, just quick ones. Rapid fire. Who's a business person that inspires you, or business, different number of business people who inspire you, and why?
Richard Branson, for sure. I've read all his books. He was probably, I read his books when I was starting out. He's dyslexic and I'm dyslexic as well. So, and with dyslexia, it's sometimes it's also a way of thinking. It's very big picture. And if you look at some of the things that he's done, and you know, yes, he's been a bit outrageous in some ways. I think for the good, he's been able to build some really recognizable and global brands in that time. So I think I just really respect it. And he took a lot of risks in what he did as
Yeah.
well. So I was able to resonate a lot with him when I was getting started. And I definitely think he's someone that I idolize and I'd love to be able to meet.
Yeah, he's a great one. And being dyslexic just adds a whole new layer to when you look at how he operates. And I've read a few of his books, and I just think they're fantastic. His outlook and the way he just gets on with stuff is just
So
incredible.
different. Yeah, it's so different to most.
And what about business books? Obviously, Richard Branson's. Any other books that really stand out?
I've read a book, probably one that really helped me it's called The Hard Thing About Hard Things.
Yeah.
I think Ben Howitz.
Horowitz, yeah.
Have you read that book?
Yeah. Ben Horowitz, yeah. It's a great one.
It's a great one because it very, very openly talks about failure, which I think is really important. And I think also being at the size that we are, a lot of the, you know, even though his companies were at a far greater scale, just some of the lessons, it's like being able to look into the future sometimes and see the writing on the wall. I think the way that it's so brutally honest and what it talks about within the book, it really gives you some insight into what you might be in for and the decisions that lead you to getting to that place as well. So
Yeah.
I really liked it from an insightful way of kind of learning about what's to come.
Yeah. No, that's a great book. That really is quite different to most of the business books, the way it's written. And it's obviously come from a guy who's been experienced in business, then gone on to venture capital and done extremely well with Andreessen Horowitz VC. But that book is quite a unique one in terms of the real drills down into the nitty gritty of the hard things about hard things, right? Yeah. Nothing sexy about the stuff that he goes through, but it's all the stuff that really is confronting about business and you have to get done.
I think you appreciate it. Yeah.
Yeah, great book. What about any sort of favorite quotes on business, life, anything else that you sort of stand by? Or
So I actually only found this out the other day. There's a video, and I think it's like Adam Sandler, not Morgan Freeman. Who else? A couple guys in a room, and they keep saying the words, "This too shall pass." And it's actually an Abraham Lincoln quote. And once I heard that, it made me realize that, you know, how I said to you just before, this is the best it's been in like 6 months. And your response is to laugh and go enjoy it. And the truth is, you know, you have a bad day. And I think that it really shows the resilience of kind of on your journey of realizing good days are great. Enjoy them while they last. There's bad days.
absolutely.
Everything that even now, you know, how I feel now will change tomorrow, and that everything will pass and that nothing's forever. And I think that resonates with me because it takes that pressure off a little bit as well.
Yeah, that's a great quote and a great philosophy, right? Because it's one of those things where, and you see it with professional athletes as well, where they sort of try not to, talk about not getting too high or getting too low and just sort of staying a bit even keel for those exact reasons. Because, when things are, if you're going to get too excited when things are great, you may be susceptible to getting too down when things aren't. So it's that matter of when things are great, that's going to pass. But also, more importantly, when things aren't going great, that will pass. But it's try and keeping that even keel is critical, right?
Exactly.
Well, that's a good one. And to finish off, what's next for the business? What's the next? You've had 5 years and done tremendously well. What do you see in the next 5 years ahead?
Personally, I think, for me, I want to travel a little bit. I want to get out there. I want to see the world. I've dedicated myself to this company for the last 5 years, and I've loved every moment, but I want to be able to do a bit more for myself, and I'm starting to, which is great. For the business, it's really growing. We've got the foundation set. Everything is running like clockwork. I can honestly say that, and it hasn't for a very long time because of the growth and the scale and the transitioning. So I think we're in a good position that will organically grow quite significantly through these new sales channels that we've set up and the diversification of revenue. In the last 6 months, we've started, no, sorry, in the last 6 months, we've started a company called Pro Board, which is a fireproof insulation panel board. And that kind of works well with our sister company, which is Procon. We've had Procon now for about a year and 4 months. We supply construction and building materials to developers and builders, mainly windows, flooring, and joinery. Ali, my business partner, is actually over there with Sam, our GM, inspecting factories and meeting some of the factories we've been working with. And that business has just taken off. We've really found a great niche there where a lot of the suppliers for these products are quite antiquated in terms of their service, their approach, how they market themselves. Well, we're kind of innovative in it, and that's been really well received. So I think we've kind of bitten off enough now, and we've got Sourci, Procon, Pro Board, and then we actually have a tech solution that we're building at the moment, which we won a government grant for, called Mineral Link, and it's a critical minerals supply chain piece of software that allows peer-to-peer contracts to take place for things like potash, different types of rare earth minerals as well. Starting to scale that up, and I think we'll spin that off into its own company and raise a little bit for that as well. So we've got a few things cooking at the moment. And I think I'm happy to leave it at that and really just ensure that we deliver a really great quality of product across all businesses and to grow in a really organic but manageable way as well.
And just in terms of that sort of organic growth, have you looked at things like raising capital or different types of partners and those sort of that? Because that's the next natural progression of it for a discussion anyway. Is that something you've looked at?
Yeah, well, I mean, we've had conversations. We had an AFR article come out about us doing, I think, $43 million in 2 years or something like real clickbait heading. And
yeah, I clicked on it.
Yeah, it worked. So, 8 or 9 VC funds reached out and we had some conversations. I think, I like having control and I've heard some really horror stories sometimes about investment and some other stuff, but we have been open to it. I think it's finding the right partner for us, right? Because we're not, burn rate and we're, a tech solution and we need to hit X for it to be valued. And then you just keep raising it. And it's just all the money goes into marketing, acquisition. Everything works right now. We're profitable. We're like, things are going well. So if we were to do it, because, we'd have some really ambitious plans of how we'd need to spend that money to get the return that we'd want as well.
Yeah, no, that makes complete sense. And that if you don't need to raise money and everything's going well organically and you maintain control, maybe that's the best way to do it. You keep your options open along the way, and it's that's a lot of people have to do it that way to grow. But if you don't have to, don't necessarily have to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Giovanni, mate, thanks very much for your time. It's fantastic to hear about the company and Sourci and everything that you're doing, all the companies that you're growing, and look forward to seeing what happens next.
Thanks, Dion. Appreciate it.
Thanks, mate.